G'day, Professor Joseph Drew. Sorry about the radio silence. This is about a new paper that's been accepted, and I'm way behind in these new paper alerts. I've had 7 accepted this year, and obviously I haven't made 7 videos. However, it is an incredibly important paper because it directly confronts a common misapprehension amongst local governments in Australia, and it has really important practical implications for most councils. So the paper is all about the effect of income inequality on local government expenditure. And you'll be astounded at how much additional expenditure response we get to income inequality. So I start the paper by citing Plato, and he said the greatest threat to any state, to any government, is inequality, that it can lead to all sorts of things. He cites terrible things such as civil war. And that hasn't gone away. But the inequality effect that we're interested in here is the effect on efficiency. And we look at 3 theories. 2 of them are conventional theories in the economic literature. The first one's political economy. It basically says that when you've got lots of heterogeneity, just a big word for differences, lots of differences in a community, you elect representatives, they're all very different, diametrically opposed positions, they can't agree on anything, and as a result there's no new spending. Well, we know that that doesn't tend to be true. You only need to look at your federal governments to see that. But it is a theory, and it has been shown in the literature in lots of different contexts. Another theory, probably the dominant theory in this strand of literature, is the median voter hypothesis, and it usually works with upward skewing. Now, if you want to know more details about any of these theories, obviously you go to the paper. There's 8,000 words about it. So the median voter theory basically says that it's always the median voter that triumphs in an election. Median, remember, that's the middle number if you put them in ascending order. Now, if the mean, the average, is higher than the median, which we get in skewed distributions, what it means is that the median voter will be relatively poorer than the average taxpayer. It would be in their interest to expand services and service provision, especially in services that are distributive in nature and that can be internalised, because in that way they'll get the richer people to pay for stuff they want, that the typical median person wants. So that's a median voter theory. Now that has some problems in local government, specifically in New South Wales, where we have unimproved land value, but in any local government system in Australia with property valuations, it doesn't necessarily track income. You can be sitting on expensive property and have incredibly low incomes. You get that a lot with pensioners and casual workers and unemployed people. So that's a problem. A lot of our services in Australia aren't redistributive. We don't do education and policing and health and lots of things that they do abroad. So that's another problem with the theory. And of course, often our average rates aren't skewed, average incomes aren't skewed to the upside. So there's a need for another theory. And I guess me and my 2 co-authors, made up another theory, which is based on the work of Wallace Oates, the decentralisation theorem. You would have heard me talk about it in other videos. And it's an organisational efficiency hypothesis. And basically the general idea about this is when you've got lots of differences in a community, it's hard for an organisation to know specifically what people want, and it's impossible for them to meet precisely the needs of everyone in standardised provision if we're just having one standard set of services throughout the local government area, which is more often than not the case. So they're the 3 theories we are testing. And with my 2 co-authors, Dr. McQuestion and Professor Miyazaki, we did some regression work using a very lengthy panel of data from New South Wales, but this I'm almost certain we'd get the same result in every state. Data from financial statements, data from the ABS, augmented with data from the Grants Commission. Okay, and what we're doing, we're looking at the response to what's called the P80-20 ratio. You can see it's had a natural log done to it. That's the top row there. Now, the P80-20 ratio is in a lot of people's opinion, the best measure of income heterogeneity. It divides the 80th percentile's income divided by the 20th percentile's income. And now, I know a more popular one is the Gini coefficient, but we go into the paper about the well-known problems with the Gini coefficient. We did actually run it with the Gini coefficients. We got more or less the same answers anyway, and you do them robust work. So, what did the regression tell us? For every 1% additional income heterogeneity, statewide, the response in expenditure is 0.263%. Massive response. I'll say that again. If your income inequality increases by 1%, your expenditure is increasing by around 0.25%. Now, as you'll see in those various columns, we disaggregated it for urban and then also rural and regional councils using the Australian classification system, as is our standard practice, because local governments in urban areas are completely different to local governments in rural areas. I don't think always our ministers and regulators and peak bodies understand that, but they're entirely different organisations. They do different stuff, have different challenges, have different needs to meet, and different revenue sources as well. Now, what we find here, not surprisingly, and I go into the reasons for it in the paper, is that for urban councils, the response is even more massive. For every 1% income heterogeneity, expenses increase by 0.4%. Now, why is that? Urban councils tend to do far more discretionary stuff. Discretionary stuff is more likely to be income redistributive. So the goodies, not the basic roads, rubbish, water, sewer. In urban councils, you're more likely to see playgrounds and environmental areas and convention centres and festivals and things like that. Okay, so there's more scope to get the incorrect level that's desired by citizens, and there's more scope to have inefficiency creeping in because of discretionary, because of standardised service provision. For rural and regional areas, it's lower, about a 0.32% response for every 1% in heterogeneity. Bear in mind, a 1% change in heterogeneity is very large. If you look at the figures from the ABS, you'll see that they don't change much at all from year to year. Now, when they do change is important, and that gets to the recommendations, which I'll cover in the next slide. So as we go through, and I've already alluded to it, the existing theories obviously don't work. The political economy theory would say that the expenditure would go down, unit costs would go down. They didn't, so that clearly doesn't work. The medium hypothesis theory predicts expenditure would go up, but as we already said, the necessary foundation for that to happen, for spending to be mostly redistributive, for it to be skewed on the upside, I go into all this paper, and most importantly, for rates, local government taxation, to be closely correlated to incomes. Those things, none of them actually apply. So as we go into the paper, the inefficiency hypothesis is the most plausible one, and basically what's happening, and I see this all the time with my local government work, particularly in the amalgamated councils where they've got massive heterogeneity. When you've got communities with huge differences in wealth and incomes, huge differences in tastes and preferences for local government services, which do correlate closely to incomes, it's almost impossible for a council to make everyone happy. You can make the rich people happy, and then the poor can't afford to pay for it. You can make the poor people happy by having lower quality services and it's more affordable, but then the rich people aren't getting what they want. So what tends to happen is you go somewhere in the middle, which is completely inefficient and no one's really happy, and that's reflected in this robust regression result. So not surprising, fits our theory perfectly, and as I said, I'd be thoroughly amazed if this didn't occur in any state that we applied it to. Now, there's a couple really important implications for this. Now, one of them, and I've got a video about this, is the importance of doing proper unbiased surveys. All the time I'm seeing regulators doing it and councils doing it, sending out surveys. My council's doing one at the moment, expecting that they're going to get useful feedback. You're not if they're self-selected. If you just say, do you want to fill in a survey? You know who's going to fill in? the people that have an axe to grind or the people that want something. 99% of your population aren't going to fill in a survey. Okay, if self-selected, you're just going to get a really biased impression of what's happening in your community. Now, given that we know differences are so important for expenditure, it underscores the importance of doing properly random surveys. Randomizing, I go through it in the video, picking people at random with no particular bias either way, and hearing from that 99% of your residents that you never actually hear from, because they're the ones that you ought to be trying to make happy, not the 1% that have their axe to grind or want us to spend money on a certain thing. It's the majority. That's how democracy works. So this finding really underscores the importance of doing non-biased surveys. And there was one thing we could do to fix local government. It would be to finally mandate and get away from these biased samples that we keep selecting. Regulators keep selecting them. New South Wales and IPNR process, we keep selecting them because it's giving people a distorted view of what most residents want. The other implication, of course, I'll put it second, is the amalgamation. Every amalgamation council is struggling with this. Some of the amalgamations, particularly in the country areas, is massive heterogeneity. It's just not manageable. In many cases, it's added to the cost incredibly, and we need to be a lot smarter about this in the future. It may mean that we have to do de-amalgamations, and when you look at the size of our local governments and reflect that they're way bigger than just about everyone else in the OECD, certainly in terms of land area, but often on population size too, contrary to the opinions and thought bubbles that people have had in the past, you realise how big a problem heterogeneity is for Australia. As a nation, we have very large heterogeneity compared to other nations. Where we know it's increasing our cost for public goods and services, that's a real problem and something we have to address. So please, if you're wanting to do regulating and wanting to do amalgamations, which all regulators seem to want to do, despite the fact that most of them have been disasters, they could be useful in the future, but most of them in the past have been disasters. If you're a regulator like that, can you please think about heterogeneity? Consult the literature, consult proper, robust empirical work rather than the guess and giggle commercial consultants we've been using in the past to make really important decisions. And this is why academic research is so important. We're doing stuff with practical implications and we're doing it all the time. But you know what? Proper research, not the stuff I see on the ABC advertisers research, which is guess and giggle opinion pieces. Proper, robust research takes a lot of time, takes a lot of resources, and takes a lot of money. And universities draw some of their money from the public, but it's often not enough to fund the sort of research we need if we're going to make better decisions than the past. And that's a real concern to me as I get towards the end of my career, and it should be a concern to every Australian, because without good information we can't possibly make good decisions. We've had good information in the past, ignored it, made bad decisions. I worry about the time in the not too distant future when we don't even have the good information to ignore in the first instance. Thank you very much for your time. Please flick this around to everyone, like, subscribe, all those sorts of things. This is critical information that every councillor, every executive in Australia should have so they can make good decisions. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.